Welcome back to another episode of Kenan and Kel with Adam and Aaron. I'm your bookworm, Adam.
I am your regular worm, Aaron.
We are joined by a third worm from the other side of the apple. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the show, Wesley Mead.
It's so rare to be introduced on a podcast as a worm, you know. I kind of dig it, you know, classy British worm. Hey guys, pleasure to be back here. As always, this is my third time on the show. I mean, you know, this is becoming a regular thing.
You have the most appearances of any of our guests.
That's a neat claim to fame. That's going right on my CV, right on my LinkedIn.
Put it right on the LinkedIn. Yes. For those listening out there, Wesley and I connected on LinkedIn before Adam and I connected on LinkedIn. So It was quite. That's another fun tidbit for you.
Well, Wesley and I connected on Goodreads before I connected with anyone else on Goodreads. So.
Am I still the only person you're connected with on Goodreads? I kind of figure I might be.
I made a writing friend on there, but that's a long story. Speaking of writing, hey, Kenan wrote a book.
Did he? Sorry.
It's called When I Was Your Age, and the subtext is life lessons, funny stories, and questionable parenting advice from a professional clown. Whew.
And I'm sorry, wait, but we have to read the book cover. A hilarious, heartwarming, and surprising ode to growing up, getting older and wiser, and luck, life, and learning from the School of Hard Knocks, benefitingly bestowed by SNL's inimitable Kenan Thompson.
Aaron, did you actually make it through this whole book, or did you guys?
I love that you asked that. So I started it yesterday, and I got to the final chapter on the Spotify premium audiobook today. So I almost made it all the way through.
Yeah, well, that's good. I will say the final chapter, you're not missing anything. Like, that's his... Oh, by the way, I want to do some shout-outs, which he's been doing the whole book.
Yeah.
So,
that guy loves his shout-outs. So the first note I made mentally, back when I read this book, so, you know, listeners, I read this book a couple months ago before I even knew we were going to record this podcast. As I was reading it, the main thing that stuck in my head, this guy likes to say shout out. This guy likes to say hello to people. I mean, I dig it. He's a friendly guy.
He also has a lot of people to shout out. I mean, and a lot of cool like celebrity encounters that he, you know, sprinkles throughout the book. But I don't mean to make the joke to say he didn't write it. He obviously wrote it. It's in his language. Like, it is exactly like he speaks, which is a little bit choppy and I think a little bit hard to follow sometimes. I liked listening better because it was his voice, reading it at his pace. And when I was reading it, it was like, you know, there's like a lot of periods and spaces and italicized things and voices that I don't really know how to do in my head, because every quote is something that he is, you know, he's performing it. So
yeah, I also listened to the audiobook, all 8 hours of it in the past month or two. So I for me, it was hard to fathom seeing that on the page, like, because he does so many like little just Kenanisms and shout outs and voices as he goes through the book.
It's interesting. I read it. I read the physical copy. And then I listened to a few bits from the audiobook in prep for this record. I genuinely think that, you know, joking aside about him writing the book, it feels like he possibly dictated a lot of the book. I think he spoke it aloud, right? It's got that tone, that kind of edge to it.
Aaron, you didn't get to it, but in the shout-outs, he shouts out like someone that basically penned like the not the book, but like wrote down all his thoughts and words and stuff like that, and that's what it feels like. I remember that was a big critique of the Twilight Zone series back in the day. It's like when all the characters talk like Rod Sterling, because he was basically using a primitive like voice recorder to write the dialogue for everybody.
That's a great call. I mean, for better or worse, they have not edited Kenan's voice out of this. Like, it very much feels like a product of Kenan Thompson, you know. So
That's true, absolutely.
Okay, let's start with some first impressions. I do want to say that I would call this book aggressively positive. Sometimes what you go to for an autobiography is like, I want to know what like the juice is, what the big story is, and I think Kenan especially is not kicking up any bit of a fuss. This is a mean version to say like he's got nothing to say. But like he's not ruffling any feathers with this this edition. Yeah, I did a similar note taking where I basically every time something came up that I didn't know about Kenan, I like wrote it down. I made a bullet point of it, and as we talk about the book, I'll check them off. But yeah, there's a healthy number of them that I think really paints a good picture of his past. But yeah, there's not. It doesn't have that kind of cutting edge, unique voice that you hope for in some autobios.
I affirm what you're saying, that it was very positive. I was looking for something juicy, but also like Kenan just kind of seems like a chill, down to earth network TV guy, and that's kind of what the book was.
Aggressively chill.
Yeah.
Is the other way I'd say the voice of this book is.
And so that's his style. That's his brand. I mean, even the fact of like, he mentions his daughters 100 times in the book, yet doesn't mention their mom, like hardly at all. Yeah, there's definitely, and then the chapter about Kel, which I'm sure we're going to get to. I understand, I respect his, he doesn't want to tell anybody else's story, but he also, in doing that, he kind of doesn't tell his side of the story either.
I was gonna say I think that there's a real story happening behind the scenes of those kind of quiet parts.
So it was kind of in the interviews and stuff, it was penned as like a tell all, and it's just not. There's a lot that isn't told. What do you think, Wesley?
I agree with everything you guys have said. I mean, it's the main thing that stuck out to me, right from chapter 1 is the conversational style. Like it feels like you're in a, albeit one-sided, conversation with Kenan throughout. And that really comes across on the page. It's like you're hanging out with him, having a beer with him, but it's like you, a stranger, are having a beer with him. He's not revealing that deep inner self to you. He's saying a lot of superficial things in a very entertaining way.
Right.
But you don't ever feel like you're getting that penetrating philosophical insight into what it's truly like to live Kenan's life. I did enjoy the book a lot. I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. But my overall feeling was that there was a deeper book here, and it's totally fair if that's not the book Kenan wanted to deliver, but a little bit of me wishes that he had,
It's tough. It felt like the book was written for different people. Like, it felt like the book was written for Kel, like that chapter was written for Kel, and it felt like that it was also written for his daughters when they grow up.
Yeah, it's a real kind of broad appeal. Which speaks to his kind of SNL-ness,
right?
Which is like, I'm not here to do the deep cuts. I'm here to do like a little bit something everyone can turn on.
I think that comes across in the structure a little bit too. Like instead of being a completely chronological chronicle of his life, it's like let's do a chapter that focuses and shouts out these particular people who were key to my life during the Nickelodeon period. Let's do a chapter that shouts out to the people who were there for me when I was down. Let's do a couple chapters that talk about my daughters, what they mean to me. And so I do think that, you both have a really good point when you say it's really broad, and it's also, this sounds incredibly negative, and I really don't mean it that way, but like each chapter does feel like a kind of checkbox of like, okay, I need to do this set of people as solid. I need to do something for this person.
Mm-hmm.
And you said a review called it like a series of essays, and I think each chapter has an objective.
Right.
Where it's like, my goal in this chapter is to give general advice that I learned as parenting, like, that helped me with my daughters, that I picked up on along the way. And it's like, all right, chapter over. I've done that successfully.
So I mean, I have like, and I want to talk more about the book and not about me. However, I have also outlined a book that I want to write, which is like a series of things I've learned. It is nice to have like know that there's a book that can be not chronological, that can actually like, and it can walk you through these different parts, because it's not supposed to all be digested at once. Like I tend to digest books when I have to record a podcast about them. But there's like layers, right? So here's a glimpse of him in LA, and then we go back to his childhood, and then we go to SNL, and then we go back to LA. And so it's kind of like this circular kind of motion. But, I feel like, especially for somebody like him, that's probably how, he sees himself. He sees himself as all of these people at the same time. And these lessons are still kind of like being learned. So,
well, let's get to the juicy deets that he provides for us. Let's maybe we can chronologicalize this.
Let's try. Yeah, I'd like a timeline
in a way that he and his editor didn't. Okay, Kenan as a boy, as a child, full like rise to fame and stuff like that. Something that I found interesting on here was in something that struck a chord with me. Is like, oh, he has a brother.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
his brother Kerwin is mentioned, in a couple different chapters, and it's like, they had lengthy 8-hour car rides, going to visit family in Virginia, going to grandma's house, and they had nothing to do, like kids nowadays might. So what they did is they would quote movies back and forth to each other, try and saying the whole thing, and that's where he referenced that he refined his impression skills, going over stuff like The Three Amigos and We're Coming to America. So I think that to me, immediately I'm like, oh, like good. I came to this book for factoids like that.
Yeah,
I knew nothing about that beforehand, and happy to learn it.
I really enjoyed those specifics, and the way that TV was a big factor in his life from childhood, in a way that made it feel like he really wanted this career for himself. We know that Kenan is one of those child stars who made it through things really well, really positively, comparatively, right? There are horror stories, and Kenan isn't really one of them. But it's so affirming to hear, he saw these major, primarily black stars up on the TV, up on the big screen. He wanted to be those people from a young age, and he made it happen for himself. That's a really lovely kind of come full circle type vibe. All of those memories felt so authentic. He said he saw himself and Kerwin as Arnold and Willis on Different Strokes. They'd quote entire Eddie Murphy movies. They really felt like true, genuine lived-in experiences, not just anecdotes he was making up to fill out the book, right?
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
Yeah, although he does do the entire Eddie Murphy ice cream routine, which is someone that has not witnessed does not land on the paper.
That's bad.
Quite as
I'm
well.
glad I was listening to the audiobook for that one. Yeah, because it made sense. Yeah, especially like this kind of the balance between like him being a shy kid and also wanting to be a performer. I like that kind of dichotomy inside of him. He mentions that his dad was like a come gather round type guy. But he wasn't a come gather round type guy. He wanted to he wanted there to be a bookend, like an opening and a closing for when he was performing, it seemed. And yeah, I like also that, he is a product of his generation, grew up watching these movies and just, wanted more of them, kind of like all of us, right? I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you want more of the things you loved as a kid. And I like that he is nostalgic in that way, and in a way makes it cool.
He dropped another bit that again reminded me of my childhood growing up, and it again a great factoid to have. But growing up, he'd be watching Johnny Carson with his dad, and he would watch his dad to see when he laughed. To me, that always struck me as big. It's like, oh, when dad laughs in the room, it's funny. It's something big that for the big boys to get. You can very much see that as the first stretches of a growing comedian.
Right, that's like a desire to understand what makes people tick. I think all of our very best performers, they do it for themselves, but they also have this desire to bring other people pleasure, right? To make other people laugh or to make other people enjoy their music. That really stuck out to me too. And I also just enjoyed the non-pop culture elements of his childhood nostalgia, and the fact that he's mostly warm about his childhood, even though there were ups and downs, right? He had mixed feelings about some elements of the church, but which presumably we'll dig into. And he makes passing references to switches being smacked around a little bit when he misbehaved here and there. Again, doesn't feel like it caused him any major damage or any trauma that he had to unpack through his work in subsequent decades. Like so many performers do.
Yeah, if anything, it's more of a skill, like a boon is how he pitches it. Like that going to Christian school and memorizing verses, he references as that's what helped me memorize lines later in life. He kind of wired his brain like that.
Yeah, I did I really did enjoy the chapter on church. Just because that's kind of a big part of my life, and I think about that in terms of how people how other people's experiences. So I am glad he touched on it. I thought it was interesting how he did, kind of was like, yeah, I still believe in God, even though like this is how, I don't really like do this or do that. But so I thought it was, he's very PC, right? He is. That's he's not trying to get canceled. I mean, he's like the opposite of that,
Of course.
right?
Yeah.
But he also, he'll then say things that are also not super popular. Like I feel like talking about religion at all, I mean, maybe he is talking about the negative sides of it as it growing up, but then how it turned into a positive.
I think you're right. I really enjoyed the sections about his church too. And, I've never been someone who's hugely into organized religion, but it was really neat to like hear his story about like the warm memories of the fellowship and community of church, what that brought to him as a child. And the way he still, again, I think maybe you're right. It's not the coolest thing in the world to say you're still on a spiritual journey, in 2024. But he's upfront about it. He says, okay, maybe I don't consider myself 100% Christian. I believe in some Christian teachings. Maybe, Islam has got something to say as well. All religions have elements that I like to bring into my life. I like to teach my children about, the morals rather than the specifics of religion. I thought that was all really touching and speaks to kind of, a deep, him being deeply in touch and comfortable with his faith.
A healthy relationship.
When
it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
The cool factoid that comes out of that is that and we point this out all the time in the show. He's got like his little cross that he has at all times, and like I didn't think anything of it during the show, but I'm like, oh well, that matches this tale perfectly. Mm-hmm. But the other big thing that I learned from the book is that he and Kel went to church together.
Yeah.
To me, that was like, whoa, I didn't realize that, but yeah, no, especially. Kel, who he even talks about in the book, is now very pastory.
Right. I thought it was fascinating how, tuned in they were to like, or he was especially to like, I don't want to go to a church that's going to exploit my fame to do something good for the church. Like, I thought it was really, that was a really like a wise thing for him to realize as a young person. He's like, oh, I see these other guys like going out here, the famous guys who are, making their church do well because they're doing well, and he's like, that just doesn't feel right to me. And I think he wanted that. He wanted some kind of like, he wanted to stay with the community, but also he knew that the longer he stayed, the more of the chance there was of that.
I am happy that he was able to kind of find his balance, and he did that by going to a big Hollywood church. Where like he was not the most famous person there.
Right.
I wrote down the name of it because I thought it's just such a big church name. It's in LA, it's the West Angeles Church of God and Christ on Crenshaw. It's just like wow, and yeah, he'd list all the other Hollywood folk that he would see there. On the spirituality, he is for sure 100% big on zodiac signs.
For some reason, what's up with that?
He doesn't explain it in the book, but he like, and I would call this almost like dangerous for a parent to be, because he would like describe his kid by what their sign is, and it's like, it's one thing if you're looking from an outside perspective, but if you're like, as a parent, you're looking at like, oh yeah, she's an Aries, that means she's all fiery and gets into trouble. It's like, wait, aren't you influencing the way that she sees herself growing up?
She's a Gemini. Nothing could be done. She was a ride-off from the day she was born. Like, it's such an odd approach. Yeah, I was surprised by that. And ultimately, I mean, he's clearly very comfortable with all of his beliefs of all kinds. I was surprised he didn't directly address it head on, because I think for a lot of his audience, it would be a surprise that he would just throw those elements in there and expect everyone to be like, oh, of course,
it's very safe. I don't think many people would be like, making a big stand talking about that stuff or anything.
Very in pop culture, right?
Faith thing in general, and going back to what Aaron was saying about being wary of his church not wanting to exploit him, that was really sound judgment from him. And it ties into what I thought was one of the sadder elements of the book, which is a way in which he and his family were exploited by someone who perhaps I can't remember if they were directly connected to the church, but it was a friend of his mother who I think she maybe knew from the church, maybe from somewhere else, who early on in his career was entrusted to handle his accounts.
Let's talk about this, because this is like I would call the big headline from the book. He's been on like TikTok and interviews talking about specifically this big chapter.
I'd avoided a kind of any media discussion about the book before it came out because I really wanted to read it fresh. So like this came as a real big surprise to me, and I was like, wait, did I miss media coverage of this happening 20 years ago? Like, is this something that like never came up on the podcast? But no, this was actually like new for this book. And yeah, it was in a book that's primarily very upbeat, and this story still has an upbeat ending, a positive attitude, but it's the saddest part of the story for sure.
I will say that he does a very good job before this section of the book too, painting his mom as a saint. Honestly,
absolutely.
She's like, she got a second job to support like his acting classes. She was always like doing all these like super mom things to get him out and in front and seize all these extra opportunities, because she really believed in him and saw in him like this opportunity to be a young star.
And he mentions that it wasn't just her, it was the whole community who was supporting him to get to this point, right?
Yeah, he was just lifted up by everyone around him. As a child, like he was Toto in his local production of Wizard of Oz and stole the show that he mentioned several times in the book.
Yes, he did. Almost the same like story like several times.
That is the talky part about it, that like some things pop up more than once. The headline, the punchline of it is that all of the money that Kenan made as a young star was taken from him by a shady accountant that they had to deal with his finances. Like something to the tune of $1.5 million. Had to declare bankruptcy to get out of this like intense situation.
It's horrible, it's a really upsetting situation. And again, it's a story we've all heard before. And Kenan avoided most of the pitfalls of young fame, but this is one that he didn't manage to sidestep. Kenan, this is one part of the book where I think it's fair to say that the book is generally very conversational, very readable or listenable, but it's not necessarily a page turner in the sense that you're desperate to find out what happens next, right? It's not that kind of book. It's essays, it's memories. This I was powering through it, trying to find out what happened next. He does a good job of building the tension here. He lays a bit of groundwork, about how his mom found this bloke, and they didn't have to deal with him for a few years. They just assumed things were okay, and then he finds this perfect house and he describes it in detail. It reminds him of like the Cosby Show house. They arrange this meeting where he's going to sign the paperwork on it. His accountant doesn't show up, and he starts to realize that something's awry. He can't get hold of his accountant. Things escalate. Kenan and a friend stake him out. They wait outside the front of his house like a cop movie. The guy manages to elude him. And then eventually he agrees to show up at the bank with him the next day for a meeting. And is ditched again. Leaves Kenan outside the bank. Never leaves the bank. Kenan never sees him again. And tragically, Kenan doesn't get into the specifics, but he doesn't have any luck pursuing this guy legally either. Presumably there was no paperwork, or, this guy was careful about what paperwork was signed.
Yeah.
Really depressing. It's Kenan, as he always does, makes a very positive mental outcome. Like he learns from it and moves forward, but it's just downright unfair, truthfully.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, and the reality is there are people who play that game, and they're out there. There are bad people who are just looking to exploit other people who are kind of very trusting. Happens all over the world, and happens all the time. And so I think it's like parenting advice. Like this book has like a lot of like jingles, like, oh, I'm gonna like tell you what I learned, and this is the one thing where it's like, yeah, this is a really good lesson, especially for people in this business. He is like, hey, I turned out okay, but like it's very possible that I would not have, and all of it was for nothing.
Yeah, his silver linings that he kind of, because of this, he had to like not stop acting at this age, and what pushed him onto SNL and all his whole career. It's unfortunate, and I think it's a lesson that everyone should have. I'm glad that it's the story that's coming out of this. that he's like, oh wow, no, I didn't know that. And if you want to read the whole thing, I would call it his most compelling chapter for sure.
Absolutely.
I like how we start off by teasing Kenan about like jumping around a lot, and then here we are.
Right. Well,
Like,
that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah. Let's see. As a child star, he like mentions all these projects that I never even heard of before. He was like, oh yeah, I was like, the kid correspondent for like this local cable movie like segment. They would tell me like, oh, what do you think of this movie, Kenan? And he's like, I give it 6 bags of popcorn out of 10. And stuff like that.
That's a pretty neat first step on the ladder, honestly. Like, I mean, if I was a kid, doing commercials where I just had to repeat the same action over and over again, it would have been real fun to get to go to a movie and ask what I was thought of it. Props to the guy for getting in there, and he was the right person for it, loving movies since he was really young. So good for him.
He also mentioned a couple like was it questionably racist like commercials that he was in as a child star, and I think his reaction is very much like, I didn't know, I just did what I was told at the time for those.
And that seems to be pretty common for kids, and that's kind of like the whole documentary series Quiet on Set that came out recently. It was a lot of kids who are like, you just do it because you don't want to lose the opportunity to make, to be on the show. You don't want to be the one who says no to things, like you're not going to get called back.
And yeah, that can lead down some very like dark paths.
Right. Kenan mentioned a number of times that kind of racist condition that he grew up in, and it was just a part of life. And he'd grown up especially in Atlanta, and he mentions that his dad's business was like, his dad was a really successful real estate agent at Century 21, went out, started his own practice, and was basically just not even racially profiled. It was like his business was segregated because of racist people. And it was really hard for him to get out of it. And his dad actually like never recovered from that. Like that was a really hard thing to read. And then it led to his parents' divorce. Really sad. But, this is kind of just, and he's just like, yep, I'm a black man in America. Right. So he's very just honest about that. And, he also doesn't let it hold him back, but it's still it's still an experience that he had.
Absolutely. Those parts where he kind of gets vulnerable, I think, are some of the best.
Of course. It's a memoir, right?
Yeah.
That's what you want. We want that good stuff, yeah.
But there's like little reflection on that, like, well, I went on to get a divorce like my parents did. Like at no point does he connect those dots, and it's like,
he's like, I don't go to therapy. I'm like, okay, like it would be a little bit more interesting if you did. Just saying.
If you're not going to therapy, at least use this book as the therapy, right?
Yeah, but no, this is.
He's like, I'm not going to therapy, and I'm in front of the whole world every week, So there's so much here, and maybe it's the nature of the book is a reflection of his actual waking consciousness. Like maybe he doesn't actually go that deep. It's quite possible that the hard things in his life he just kind of moves past them with this kind of graceful positivity.
There's that one big YouTuber, Mr. Beast. Everyone probably has heard of him in some context or another.
Who is it? Mr. Yeast? What's his name?
Mr. Beast. He had an interview recently where he said like, because my content's so broad, I have developed a lack of a personality. Like my own personal interest, like I can't like anything too much or be too into anything. I have to stay like this kind of milquetoast level ground, and I think something has to be said about that when you're doing SNL for 20 years.
That's totally fair. I genuinely think the only two people he's outright negative about in this book are his accountant and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, well,
I mean, this is a rotting punching bag. Is what Donald Trump is.
It's not crazy that of all the people.
Yeah, it's very not crazy at all. That he's like,
no.
I did enjoy kind of off on a tangent here. I did enjoy his description of Elon Musk. While we're on the kind of controversial personalities of, he thought he was being funny, so that's all that matters. very diplomatic way of describing his appearance on SNL.
Also, like that's at the end. That's him dropping like his big juicy details. Like, oh, I got one for you. Elon Musk is full of himself, and it's like, okay, well, like, yeah. Well, if we are digging up Kenan's dirty secrets, we have to mention that he lied on his resume to get to D2, the Mighty Ducks.
Adam, this brought me right back to your
A confession on the show.
when you applied to be an extra.
Yeah, on Good Burger too. I feel like that exact same thing. I feel like I messed up. I could have got it if I lied and it was showed up. I feel like everyone just lies on those.
Could you imagine?
Maybe that's why I can't cut it as an
you
actor.
said you could roller skate. You showed up and then made you roller skate.
Yeah, it's very much that.
Just check off all these boxes you can't actually do. Yeah. So Adam, what was the juicy detail here?
He basically lied about being able to ice skate, so they got into the ice skating movie, and apparently did rigorous training at that point to correct that mistake. And apparently he's great at it now. I love hearing that like, oh yeah, sometimes they go like to the Rockefeller Center like ice rink after SNL, and like he's like schools everyone because he's so good.
Adam, you're not originally from New York, right?
No, I spent 4 years there, so
You're like, what is that? The Rockefeller the ice circle.
look, I can tell you all about the 5 boroughs, but
Oh yeah, awesome.
Kind of tying into that physical limitations or like willingness to do things on screen. What I did enjoy as a big guy myself is his discussion about big people in the media, heavy people in TV and film, his reluctance to take his shirt off, being a little bit self-conscious about that sort of thing, and how committed he was to that. Again, I think it speaks to his honorability as a person that he did take his shirt off in the film Wieners for his friend Zachary Levi. He didn't want Zach to have to go it alone, but has pushed back in other circumstances where he felt uncomfortable or where he felt he was being kind of made a mockery of. Like so many subjects in this book, he's fairly objective about being bigger, and says, he knows that it was bad for his health, and he's doing his best to get his health on track with cycling and other sports and eating a little better, but also discussion about fat shaming in the media and how unfair that is, and how, while he didn't, we all know it's far worse for women. It tends to be a lot worse for women in the media. There are still some challenges when you're a bigger guy in the public spotlight, and I think he was fair and balanced on that, saying, he would never wish to actively endorse an unhealthy lifestyle, but that it's not really fair to judge people based on how they look.
Yeah. Well said.
a juicy deet he dropped in there on that front was that he, as a child, he did steroids at one point to kind of curb that lifestyle.
Right.
Well, which to me is like, that's like, whoa, hang on, say more.
Yeah.
Like this is.
Oh, it was the 90s. Everyone did it.
Yeah, that's all he said.
Yeah, he does gloss over that a little bit, and he mentions in passing that he tried to take some pills a bit later on that are supposed to help with weight loss and that sort of thing. And, he's clearly not a big substances guy in general. So it was interesting to hear him talk about his own challenges on that front and the lengths he would go to. Because, I'm a big guy, right? For me, putting down that last slice of pizza is just as difficult as a smoker saying no to a cigarette, And so we all have our vices, and so it was interesting to hear him grapple with that and talk about that, as with so many things in this book, the fairly, reasonable-minded methods he came up with to kind of cope with that. Like, okay, well, maybe I just won't eat 2 hot dogs at 3 a.m. anymore, Maybe I don't need to have 2 burgers for every meal. He came across really well, and it was a very encouraging chapter, from someone who's been in that position.
Yeah, and you're right that in saying that it was balanced, right? Because it's not just all body positivity, but it's a balance of being comfortable with yourself, knowing your worth, setting your boundaries. But then also, exactly. Also working on yourself, but in in a graceful way. He's not the guy who's going to be at, he's not the David Goggins. He's not going to go out and run at 5 a.m. and, just start yelling through Central Park, right? He's not going to do that. And it's that is important too, because there's some people who think that's the only way to do it.
I also enjoy that he emphasizes that if you're going to try and improve your health in that way, you should be doing it for yourself, not for other people. The people you love, sure, but not for like faceless people out there. People who see you on TV and judge you, or people who walk by you in the street and might say something negative about you. You've got to ultimately do it for yourself and for your own life and the people you love.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be remiss if we didn't get into this any sooner than we have. So D2 happened, and he got on all that, and he tells a bunch of really neat facts about that time of his life. While the show was going on, they spent the first 3 hours before then going to school in the morning. They would have a school class and do that stuff before they took care of all that. And as someone that's just was trying to fathom how this works, I'm like, oh, cool. I've been wondering that for so long. When they learned,
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it must be exhausting, and I think
absolutely.
if it was me in that position, like, oh man, I've got to get through 3 hours of like algebra before I can do the fun that I'm being paid to do.
and dense too. Dense, a full school day, I guess, rolled up into that.
I bet they didn't get a recess in that 3 hours.
Well, during lunch, they would sneak out to the Orlando Studios theme park. He tells a couple stories about that.
Yeah, this part is very cool.
Yeah, before and like that little era too, like kind of season 1, right before they were famous for doing that, so that like, they could go around undetected. But yeah, just he talks about all the rides that he would go on, like, countless times and stuff like that. And that is a kid's dream, no doubt.
Seriously.
Listening to that and just imagining, like, did we go to Universal? We went to Universal when we were a kid.
One time.
So we went to Disney World, and then later on we went to Disney World and Universal. That was like the only time. It was just so like, as a kid, that's like the place to be. And so even listening to it, just thinking about like what it would be like to be a kid, just running around there, like unsupervised in the 90s, like, oh, like that is such a cool thing to just, daydream about even.
Most kids too, like they have that same experience where it's like, oh yeah, we went there once or twice. Or, some families like, yeah, an annual trip we had down there. No, every day you go to the best place on earth.
It's really like living a dream. Like, you can just open the door from your job, but your fun job, you're a teenager and you're being paid money to have fun. You just open the door and like, it's there. Like, limitless fun and entertainment and remarkable freedom is just right there. Yeah, on truly aspirational stuff.
And it was so obvious that they loved it and they were working really hard, but yeah, when they had the chance to just play, like they had so much fun. And I was brought back, of course, to the Kenan and Kel theme song, and just like, them on the globe, just like, how many times did they do that before? How many times have they been up there just like, this is our spot, And yeah, it was really cool I like that part of it.
So on set, he describes them as the three amigos, Kenan, Kel, and Josh Surfer. Which I did not know. That was a big surprise for me that Josh had such a big role in Kenan's life. Like, he never mentions living with Kel. There was a point, like, in their 20s or whatever, he and Josh were, like, living together. Apartment buddies in the Hollywood area.
I guess it really is indicative of, Kenan's concern about, he didn't want him and Cal to always be known as this one tied together entity when that wasn't really who they were in their personal lives. And I get that, like, as an 18-year-old, you might not want that. I mean, Kenan's pretty diplomatic in the book about saying that it was the three of them and that he really wanted Josh to be on Kenan and Kel with them. I think it's fair to say that there were probably times in his life where he was a lot closer to Josh than he was to Kel, but circumstances dictated that Kenan and Kel were the two, the alliterative two black guys on the show. Like, that was kind of foisted, that kind of narrative, that friendship was almost foisted upon them.
Which, it sounds like they had their chemistry, their moments, and stuff like that, but it does, it paints a really kind of one-sided feeling to it. A bit that Kenan's like, this is the picture they painted for us. And he does his best. He's like, when we could, we made sure they said our full names, that it just wasn't just our couple name all the time.
Right,
Yes.
right. Yeah, and in how he wished Josh did have a part on that other show, but they were so young. They on Kenan and Kel, but
Yeah.
they were so young. What are you gonna do?
Well, it's crazy. His timeline gets a little messy, I think, in the book. But he does mention that, like, at 19, he moved into his own house in the Hollywood Hills. Originally, he has an apartment in Beverly Hills at 18, which, like, that on its own is like, what are you saying? like a 2-bedroom place that some people will like stay over and stuff like that. But eventually, yeah, Nick Cannon and him were roommates and got their own house in the Hollywood Hills at 19.
I think this is a little bit why Kenan is, or a lot of it why Kenan is so chill. Because I think he knows how absurd it is. Like, his life is... And he mentions it a couple times, like, I'm not trying to sound like I'm complaining about all of this.
Yeah, I was essentially Richie Rich
Yeah,
like for a lot of this.
He still is really humble, and I think that's from his upbringing. But, okay, back to where we were.
I will say, shout out, like Kenan does, to his nickname for Nick Cannon, which is Captain Splash.
I dug that.
After this Kenan and Kel era, which I think goes through really quickly, but it's, from what I can tell, it's based off what he remembers. But it's like Kel was ready to move on. He wanted to do his own thing. He wanted to be like a rapper and an adult star. He was kind of getting jaded with the kids stuff. So that's what led to them splitting a bit. And yeah, the Kenan had this whole financial struggle that went down. And following that was a lot of him reinventing himself as a comedian, like, going out there, paying attention to what he liked, like who taught him his comedy growing up. I do want to say, I think throughout this book, he shouts out like every single black actor across media. Like, he's either they like had the same teacher, or he talks about Martin Lawrence on Martin. Or Bill Cosby and how he inspired his clean comedy before he became a notorious sex pest.
You're right. If I had a digital copy, I would probably have, done a Control F or Command F to see how many times the phrase "shout out" is in there. I feel like it's in 3 digits.
Also, Zeitgeist. He's a big Zeitgeist guy.
Oh yeah,
he said Zeitgeist at least 10 times. Yeah.
Whenever he meets someone too, it's shout outs and the biggest compliment he can possibly give. Like they are the wind beneath my wings, and this person, man, they are the stars in my sky.
And it's funny, as you read through it, especially if you're reading it compressed or listening to it compressed across a day, like, wow, this guy's shouting. But I do think it really does speak to perhaps a desire to be liked, but primarily just that he's a genuinely nice guy, like you very rarely hear anyone with something bad to say about Kenan Thompson, and I think he genuinely does hold love for all of these people in his heart.
I think the book is him paying it forward on that front and not saying anything negative about anyone else.
I also think, he also knows how things can turn negatively. And like he was, like I mentioned with the thing with his father earlier, like he was clearly negatively affected by other people's negativity. That's not a great sentence, but I said it. So he doesn't want to be somebody who brings negativity into the world, like, period. And I do admire that. I admire how conscious he is about it, and he it's just, he is who he is. I like how much he is himself.
I think you nailed it. It's a conscious desire to not put any negative energy back out into the world. He knows it doesn't achieve anything, and obviously we'll get into the chapter that's most relevant to this podcast soon, the Kel focused chapter. But he's very careful to not be directly negative. I think he's seen what that kind of negativity can do, that kind of toxicity, the way it can leak out into the media. And I don't think he wants a repeat of the rumors that happened 15, 20 years ago about his and Kel's relationship. I don't think he's there to kind of get those TMZ headlines, Before
we get to that kind of momentous chapter, do we have any other shout-outs and bits that we want to mention?
I wish there was a little more talk about what it was like to actually make Kenan and Kel. He does spend some time talking about all that, but you guys on this podcast, myself as well, being like a Kenan and Kel super fan, I dug all that, but Kenan and Kel is really where it's what it's all about for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping for a little bit of insight, a little more discussion about the cast and crew on that show, maybe some tidbits about certain episodes, and it really does get glossed over pretty quickly, which was a little bit disappointing, I'll be honest.
Of course, we love the show. We want to see more of it, but also we know that there's a lot to it. Just the production of it. I mean, he mentioned how they moved from, Orlando to LA, but yeah, there was so much to that show, and also like really honing his craft. I feel like more than I mean, I haven't watched that much all that. When I was a kid I did, but the whole Kenan reacts phenomenon, like that started on, I mean, it feels like it started on Kenan and Kel, like his reactions, his comedic timing, like
it's where he learned how to be a straight man for his SNL days, essentially, and why that means that you're not exactly the straight man is also a very funny component to this formula. Like, you can still have plenty of your own jokes, and your reactions are the important thing.
Completely. I mean, you guys are totally right. He honed his craft so much on the Kenan and Kel show. I'd love to hear specifics about how things work, like, the scenes shot in front of the red curtain, any fun outtakes, any things that went wrong. I'd really love to hear some specifics about the shoot of Two Heads Are Better Than None, which was obviously a completely different vibe to your standard Kenan and Kel episode. I thought that might get a passing mention because it was an on-location shoot, more of a feature type vibe. Bupkis. It's a shame.
It's just in line with everything you said, like, he's like, I got no memory of that stuff. But I mean, you're writing a book, dude. It's not like it's not out there anymore. It's not like Gone with the Wind. It'd be neat if he like sat down and rewatched it and didn't go off of memory and just said like, oh yeah, I'm certain that'd bring up something or another.
If you watch it, you will remember some of it. Like, you will remember Kel with the turkey. Like, how could you forget that? Like, I'm sorry. Like, how could you forget destroying the kitchen?
It's going to flick something in your mind. Like, you might remember, like, oh, man, we had to do that scene 7 times. I felt sick by it. That kind of anecdote.
Yes.
They have to be out there.
Juicy commentary. That's what we want.
Something.
What were they downing in the Cold War? What was actually in the medicine,
No mention of orange soda at all. I know it's not his thing.
Not a drop of orange soda is in this book. And it hurts. Yeah, he almost talks more about the Steve Harvey show and his appearance on that.
I'm like, okay, I know you were on the Steve Harvey show, right?
Yeah.
Our listeners know.
If this is your only Bible to Kenan, you'd think that had more. He was in 4 seasons of that Steve Harvey show, not as one with his name in the title.
Also, just maybe this is just me defending Kevin and Heath because we just do love their writing and their comedy, but he also was like, yeah, we didn't have any say. Like, they wrote everything for us. I mean, they wrote some pretty good stuff.
That's kind of how it works on a sitcom. Like, I mean, SNL is a different beast, of course, but like, the cast of Friends, the cast of Frasier, they're not in their autobiographies that they didn't get to write the shows as well.
Right. Yeah. So I just, a little bit of recognition to like Kevin and Heath, who, made them so funny. Maybe he was staying away from the writer's room for,
obvious reasons.
Other reasons of
well, that is the weird part of that. We'll get to that.
This is like this podcast is very much like Kenan's book. It's a lot of like, hey,
it's very much
and we'll
the
get
same.
to that.
If you want the same emotional experience.
Oh, we're not going to tell you now.
Finding listening to this podcast a frustrating experience, don't bother with the book.
Yeah, well, we read it so you don't have to sometimes. So I had a couple other fun facts. Kenan's middle name is Stacy, and he talks about how that wasn't very popular, and he liked to keep that secret for a long time. He describes himself as having no fashion.
I like that part. He's a dad. Yeah.
I like that, yeah.
He's like, I wear shoes till they fall off my feet.
I've never felt more like Kenan before in my life. He tells a really good story I don't want to miss, is that when he was 3, he was playing with his toys in his room, and his brother was tricked. He was telling his mom, why is Kenan going to have people over, have company over, and I can't have company over? And his mom's like, he doesn't have anyone over, and it was him doing multiple voices of his, toys. Yeah. And, that, I think that's a real, going to be a star moment.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
he just stands out, even in his
100%.
house.
Something else that he mentioned in passing that made me chuckle was his SNL salary. He didn't want to be specific about it, but he described it as being more than a Walmart greeter, but on par with a nuclear power reactor operator. I presume everyone who reads this book immediately Googles average US salary for nuclear power reactor operator to try and get an idea of what we might be talking.
Yeah, I did the exact same thing.
What'd you get? What was the?
It's big.
It was like, in the six figures at least, yeah. So I mean,
Yeah,
I
deep
guess not,
six figures.
yeah, we're not talking like billionaire territory, but it should be enough to live on, I think.
Those are the bits I wanted to bring up. Let's talk the Kenan and Kel chapter.
So he talks about he kind of I don't even know how does the chapter begin? I'm not the right person to say.
He goes back to like when they first like grew apart, and he talks a lot about his SNL audition because that was one of the last times they interacted for a long time.
Right. So it was after Tracy Morgan left the show, they're hiring a new Tracy Morgan kind of
type.
Yeah, which he mentions.
And this was big for me. I didn't know their SNL saga. I always thought it was, oh yeah, Kenan and Kel auditioned and only Kenan got in.
Right.
It's like, no, they were trying to fill one seat. And they like had all these black actors come in and tried them out and like see who do we like here. And Kenan was the one that kind of rose above all the others.
Right, and it was 3 interviews. The first one was like in front of this the writers. The second one was a 5-minute set in the studio, and the last one was like a 10-minute set on stage in L.A. Yeah, I mean it's a serious interview process. You're right, Adam. I didn't realize the degree of it. The degree of the Kenan over Kel kind of, part of it.
And that first part was the hardest, is that Kenan describes. It was the stand-up portion, and he's not a stand-up comedian. And neither is Kel. And that's kind of like, you can see how like some of his bits don't hit as well in that kind of setting. It's Kenan's oddly, I would say that his reaction to Kel in this is kind of, it doesn't feel the best. He's very much like, things are cool now. But his read of that time, it feels like a bit, he's like, oh, I wasn't the one causing a scene. I was the one stirring things up. Who's to say who stirred things up?
I thought that with all the kind of build-up and like tiptoeing around the situation, he would nail down something specific that happened. Mm-hmm. But the whole relationship breakdown isn't really explained to me. And I get it, that's totally fine. They're allowed to be private about this sort of thing. But to me, the way I read the chapter was he describes their relationship as complex towards the end of the Kenan and Kel show days. Things got pretty bad, I think is a phrase he used, and he says a lot of that was due to Kel's funkiness, which again is frustratingly vague. I'd really like to know some of the specifics. I mean, I know he got married young and he moved away, but funkiness is a bit of a weasel word, really.
He also mentioned that Kel was political, like much more political than he was, and how Kel's from South Side of Chicago, and kind of like Black Panther kind of deal. Like there's some kind of political unrest in Kel's like funkiness. I think that was a little bit part of it. Again, so vague though. Who knows?
I agree. I think that's a contributing factor. Yeah, you're right there. And so one thing I was intrigued by was the way he talked. So it seemed like the network, the WB, were interested or were considering several spin-offs, or not spin-offs, but different shows with Kenan and Kel attached to them. And this is around the time they picked up What I Like About You, which was Amanda Bynes' first adult sitcom after doing The Amanda Show. So it kind of would make sense that maybe they'd want something with Kenan and Kel, like as that audience is getting a little older, going through their teenage years, maybe they'd want something from them. Reading between the lines, it sounds like Kenan wasn't keen. He describes his attitude as not deliberately tanking the discussions, but he wasn't particularly thrilled or enthused. And I guess if you're in a room with Kenan and Kel trying to discuss a project and Kenan sat there not particularly looking excited about the project, maybe you're not going to sign the dotted line on it, right?
Yeah, especially that movie that like TV show pilot's family. Like for every one that goes through, there's 10 that doesn't.
Yes.
And so if half the talent is is not hitting the gas, then you got a dud.
Yeah, and if your competition is Amanda Bynes.
Right, yeah.
My impression is that Kel was enthusiastic about continuing some kind of maybe purely financially. I don't know, because to hear Kenan tell the story, they're not on wonderful terms here. So it seems like Kel was clearly interested. If neither Kenan nor Kel were interested, I don't think the discussions would ever have happened. Put it that way.
Yeah.
So that was interesting to me. But then Kenan says that they did continue to hang out a little bit, and they worked on like a proof of concept for a Pee-wee's Playhouse style children's show. That was a revelation to me. I'd figured there might have been talk about other sitcoms, but like the idea that they like worked up like a children's, I guess,
a Blue's Clues of their own.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of nuts, honestly.
That's a crazy thing. They mentioned a couple team ups that they had that I like pulled out my magnifying glass when I heard that they hosted the kids version of like the NBA All-Star Weekend and stuff like that. I'm like, ooh, that's something to track down for our show. But yeah, no, that they also mentioned something that Kevin Heath mentioned to us, which is like at one point they're considering a Kenan and Kel like go to college,
right,
and stuff like that. He drops a line of that, and I'm just like, yeah. So there were a couple ones out there. But I think Kenan was big on he said he paid close attention to Jaleel White's career trajectory. Another shout out there, but he was on Family Matters, he played Urkel, yeah. And he was worried about being typecast, always in this package deal. And so, yeah, he doesn't say it, but you can see where the divide starts to happen here.
Right. And the other divide was, and he says this explicitly, like Kel got married and moved to Pasadena, which was a hike. And they're 21, right? So that's the time when you're going out, enjoying life, partying. And listen, if you have a friend who doesn't do that, I mean, you're going to grow apart because you just don't have similar interests. Kel has a kid, and I think, from past research, I'm pretty sure the thing that happened with Kel was like involving that woman and like some kind of lawsuit or something like that. I don't quite remember the details, but it was like Kel clearly was like going one way and Kenan was going the other way just because of their life choices.
This happens to a lot of people in college too. Right. Everyone that's gone has experienced this. It's people that like, when you're living in a town with all people your age, it's like that. You're best of buds. But when you live a distance apart, it's like, oh yeah, we don't see each other every day anymore. We don't talk as much anymore. And these slowly start to fade.
That's right. I mean, how many of us, had friends in elementary school or primary school in the UK, or, moving up to middle school. You were friends by circumstance. Like, you didn't necessarily have that much in common, but you sat together 6 hours a day in lessons. You had the same experiences. And I guess it's the same if you're working on set with someone. Like, they had all of these shared experiences, but, as they both started to find things outside of that life, they realized they didn't have as much in common as they might have thought, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
It sounds like Kel got into a big relationship that didn't work out.
Yeah.
in that kind of era, and he took a lot of bad turns, and that he like referenced that as like the TMZ era, like when all this stuff has kind of happening behind the scenes, and he fully like admits that he's like, look, I'm not the. I can see why this would be easy to say that I'm like, I got it all going on. Like I'm the son that didn't run away. I'm the one that's got the steady career and stuff like that. So it's hard for me to be in that position because things were going smoothly on my end after like my own struggles with the finances.
Right. And he also mentions that like Kel in this difficult part of his life dealt with like addiction and suicidal ideation and like just this really dark stuff that Kel has never explicitly said, right? And you can just, and then he mentioned later that Kel is now a lot more religious and very positive and his life has turned around, and you can't help but think it is kind of Kel's like second act that he's in now, and something really awful happened. And, it's not for anybody to dig into, except for the tabloids will always do that. But I think, for us, we're all adults. I think we want the honest story of what happened. It feels like we're still kind of playing this like, oh, look at these people on screen kind of thing. Like, well, we're all just people, and it's like, I understand that's really horrible things to talk about, and you don't really need to unload your traumas on the world. However,
we might be some decades or years away from that, Aaron. Like, maybe it's still a little too fresh. They've
very
made
possible.
up too recently.
I also think, so I said earlier, I don't think that this was particularly aggressively edited. I think it's pretty much just as it flowed out of Kenan's pen or out of his mouth. I do think this chapter was tightly edited. And I say that because there is one in one paragraph, Kenan says there was no bad blood between us, and 2 paragraphs later he says people correctly started assuming there was bad blood between us. Nothing in between those 2 paragraphs explains what the source of the bad blood is, nor does he really and obviously we've just spent 10 minutes discussing it. You can read between the lines. I don't think he would have said it or written it that way if there wasn't some more context in there at some point. It's very odd to go from no bad blood, I'm so good at speaking, to people correctly start assuming there is bad blood.
It's past midnight there, Wesley. You got a free pass.
No, not yet, Aaron. The time change hasn't happened for them.
It's only 11:30. I've got no excuse.
Oh, yeah. Come on, Wesley. Stick with it.
I should be on like a caffeinated drink, but I'm committed to the Fanta only during podcasts.
Oh, there you go.
What?
Hey.
Big props for that.
A man after our own heart, Wesley.
I think we've dwelt on it the proper amount of time.
Yes, and are you gonna get to the good stuff?
the them getting back together? Yeah. Well,
come on.
Before the good stuff, Kenan does mention that the person that got them back together is Dan Schneider.
Right.
If only we'd done it. I mean, there's been rumors about Dan Schneider for a while, but if only we'd done this podcast back in January.
Yeah. Now everyone what they have to talk about is Quiet on Set, the Dark Side of Kids TV, the new. Was it Max documentary?
And yes, so he mentions that Dan Schneider reunites them, basically. He's like, hey, Kenan, have you talked to Kel? And Kel, he's like, hey, you guys should communicate with each other, basically. Like, They start
texting again. They start, they do the Jimmy Fallon Good Burger sketch together.
And that sketch was just 2 days after they reconnected, by the way. Did that blow your guys' minds?
Yeah, I was surprised.
He finally, he says they play phone tag and they finally catch up on the phone for a half hour.
Yeah.
And then, 2 days later, per Kenan's recollection, they're on Fallon. That's absolutely crazy to me because I remember watching that Fallon sketch at the time and thinking, wow, they must have had a stronger relationship all these years than TMZ has let on. But no, that's a 48-hour reconnection there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the timeline does seem weird because, isn't Fallon booked way in advance? How did they get this set together?
Gambling on Dan Schneider being able to pull off this magic.
Was Kenan just going to be on it, and then he's like, "Hey, I have an idea. Why don't we put Kel?"
You'd be surprised. I think it follows a lot of SNL philosophy, which he describes the process of making an SNL episode, and I have so much more respect for that program now.
Oh yeah, it's.
I used to be the just edgy millennial was just like, it's not that funny. It's on way too late. I can't watch it, but. The way he kind of just talks about pedigrees and their kind of production cycle, where essentially the whole show comes together in a week.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, way more respects for coming out with something, halfway viewable, let alone kind of funny. At that rate, is good job on you guys. To that point, it's kind of like, yeah, no, it's hopefully the last ever positive Dan Schneider shout outs. I really hope that that these two are more divorced from that than connected, and they stand on the sides of the kind of the victims of those stories.
Yeah, and I'm not an apologist or anything like that, but Kenan could have said anything about Dan Schneider. Right, mm-hmm. And he certainly, I'm sure there's some stories about the two black actors coming together on a Nickelodeon show written by all white people. I'm sure there was things to say, and he chose to talk about how he reunited them. So, it is.
I think it says a lot about Kenan, right? It's not so much
Yeah.
what it says about Dan Schneider.
Right,
The
right.
guy's done bad things. It's what it says about
Yeah.
Kenan, that he is that guy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He's that silver lining finding Kenan. Like same thing with the accountant's story. It ends with the tale of like, and that's why I like put my whole ass into SNL.
Right, yeah, and it was great, because Good Burger came a couple years later. Dan was not a part of that, and it does feel right. It does feel like, okay, this was, they did the All That thing first, the All That reboot, and then Good Burger, but yeah, it feels like the tides have changed, and there will be more Kenan and Kel in the future. That's what it feels like.
He seems to be keen on that. The last chapter is a lot about what the future holds for Kenan.
Right.
He does a pretty great like pitch of like what's coming soon, and he's essentially says, I've been on SNL for 20 years. I want to be on SNL for 20 years, maybe a little bit more, but it seems like a good time to put that past me. He's big on his production company and wants to move forward with that. He just seems like he's this book. This movie, Good Burger 2, this whole like era is very much Kenan evolving into that kind of more armchair, out of the spotlight, more of a producer, more of a mentor than a main talent. And I think I think that there's room for him and Kel in that kind of environment.
I could see some Adam Sandler style movies coming out of these guys.
Ooh.
I mean, think about how many connections Kenan has in the industry.
I think he can pay off all his connections that he made in the shout-outs in this book.
And you think about it, it's like, well, what is he trying to do, right? I mean, it's possible that this book is like setting up and just making sure, it's his like SNL finale, like, hey guys, pay attention. Is it?
I didn't mention his like Hollywood Star. He did that like right around this time too.
Adam Sandler's a very interesting comparison. Adam Sandler's made a lot of not particularly critically well loved, but like fun hangout movies that like really are just Netflix or Paramount paying for him and his friends to have fun in a great locale and play around, and maybe at the end there's 90 minutes of usable footage, right? I would love for that to happen to Kenan. He deserves that.
Yeah, he deserves it, honestly. I mean, he's put up with a lot.
He's also totally chill for that.
Right.
He's that kind of personality.
I mean, I would love to see, like a Happy Gilmore with Kenan Thompson. Like whatever his thing is. He is funny enough for that. He has a different style of comedy than Adam Sandler, right? But it is like if you just get the right people together and you have a couple cool cameos, you're gonna have a decent movie. Like Good Burger 2. Good Burger 2 had to hit a lot of things to get right. But if you make your own movie. Like there's a lot less restriction, honestly. So it is interesting to see what's going to come.
I think he also hints at something that I found like probably the most interesting thing in the book is that it's like, besides broad comedy, what kind of stories am I interested in telling? And he talks about coming of age stories and how like that seems like if he has any kind of creative future, it's going to be telling those kinds of things, which as someone who we basically saw come of age on our screens and has a very unique version of that and is very like, much like his whole childhood to adulthood is on display for us. I'd love to see that person tell that kind of story.
Totally agree. I mean, coming of age is perhaps on some days my favorite subgenre of TV and film. Like it has this perfect like everyone can find something to relate to in a coming of age movie. Everyone has done that. Everyone knows what it feels like to be in that kind of position where you're just on the cusp of reaching out into the broader world. And Kenan clearly feels at home in this, as you guys have, nicely articulated, this kind of America's Dad position of sitting there doling out advice to, he's been there, he's done that, he's bought the t-shirt, he's been through a hell of a lot of things, he's seen a hell of a lot of stuff. And coming of age is exactly the kind of genre where you can put some of those messages to work and also deliver on both like the comedic side of things and the dramatic side of things.
Yeah. And his daughters are, of course, coming of age, right? He still has young daughters, and he's done the whole Hollywood Walk of Fame. Doesn't he have a star? Like, he's done it. Like, he started young and he made it, and he is like world famous for his sketch comedy. And now he's like, now the most important thing in my life are my daughters. So it is kind of like, he's going to make content for his daughters, right? He's going to make shows that his daughters can watch and love and grow up with. And he's going to be somebody who, he's going to make his daughters proud, probably first and foremost. And I think it's really important for us to have somebody like him. Like, he is really a great, like, I want my kids to grow up watching his stuff, right?
Most people with his career are there at 65, not 45.
Yes. He has so much time left.
He has so much time, so much energy, and I think we're going to see some really cool stuff coming out from under his umbrella.
Absolutely.
In the
future.
future.
That final chapter, the epilogue, where he's listing all of his goals for the future, they include career things, they include personal things like playing the guitar, doing some mentoring, and then the final one, of course, is looking after his girls, raising his girls right. That's the most important thing. He's a guy that, you shouldn't idolize celebrities. People have been burned before, but like, he really is someone whose approach to life I aspire to, and I do think that comes across here. Like, I wish I could be as generous and kind-hearted and never bitter about anything as he is. It's such a strong personality to aspire to replicate.
And while I do think that it's a bit of the narrative voice too. I think, like, I aspire to be as chill as Kenan portrays himself in this book. He does mention that being hot-headed a little bit early on and a couple other of his foibles and stuff like that, but no, this is I could see why someone would write this book, like, for their children, to kind of, for their people that want to know a little bit more about you, but not like every deep, dark, dirty secret.
Right. And it's not what it is, and he doesn't need to be, right? So I think part of me as the writer, maybe poet, maybe like, philosopher side of me wants that deeper side, but he's a guy in the public eye, and he actually does have a role to play, right? Especially like kids growing up with TikTok and like just the onslaught of social media, like all of this stuff, right? And so his kids are growing up in that world, and he's gonna do something about it. He's gonna do something positive.
Oh, yeah.
He's gonna bring his childhood to life for young people. I just have a feeling that's going to be part of the next stage. And honestly, I'm inspired and excited I'm excited for what's next for him. I can't wait.
Well, I think that's a good note to wrap everything up on. Thumbs up, thumbs down if our audience should check out. When I was your age, life lessons, funny stories, and questionable parenting advice from a professional clown.
It is definitely a thumbs up from me. I mean, I have some reservations. It's not everything I wanted it to be. No book truly is. No memoir truly is. But this is just like a really fun time. Like, you're not gonna. It's not world changing. You're not gonna learn a whole lot of industry gossip, or he's not spilling the tea on certain things. But if you like hanging out with Kenan and his voice and his tone and his personality, and if you're listening to this podcast, you almost certainly do. It's a great way to spend a few hours.
It's also like something I think that might not be for the super fans. There's some stuff in there that some fun tidbits for us, but if you only know Kenan from like one of his works, just SNL or just Kenan and Kel, and I think it's very good for that kind of person. To see like, oh, there's a whole like other half of this person's life. I learned a lot about the SNL like era, which I mostly have seen from afar. Yeah, so I would say thumbs up if you're looking for an autobiography.
His career has spanned our lives. He has been around since we were kids, and he's going to be around for a lot longer. He's somebody we grew up with, and I think it is cool to see his kind of retrospective. It's a book that like has a lot of stream of consciousness, a lot of conversational nature. It misses some key points, but it also leaves you feeling happy and uplifted, and it makes you laugh. And that's kind of his whole thing, right? So he's true to himself. It's a good read. It's worth it. It's a good listen. I listened. I encouraged a listen. So thumbs up for me.
Yes, I would recommend a listen over a read myself.
It's a long podcast, it's a long solo podcast. It's, and there's also a book form, so he can make a little change.
Has anyone ever marketed an audiobook as a long solo podcast before? You might be onto something there, Aaron. I like it.
Yes. No, actually, yes. Yeah, there's the Duncan Trussell. Yeah.
If you've listened to 100 hours of us talking about Kenan, you should listen to 8 hours of Kenan talking about Kenan.
If you have Spotify Premium, it's free, so absolutely it's worth it.
That's the best, most important advertising. Spotify Premium, this is free on there.
Yes.
So you can't go wrong with that.
When I was listening to it, and it was a little bit like, is this going to deliver what I want it to? And now talking about it with you guys, I'm glad I listened. I'm glad he wrote it, and I'm glad that he's still around because it's exciting. And Kel is too. I mean, we're gonna see what they can do together. I think there's more Kenan and Kel coming,
and there will be more Kenan and Kel with Adam and Aaron coming soon too. There's some interviews in the works. I'm gonna have a child soon. I'm gonna hopefully use some of the advice I learned in this book to help them out.
Yeah. Do you think you're gonna sign your child up for acting classes, Adam?
It depends if they show the kind of talking to yourself potential that Kenan did.
It's like it's all judged on their early performance.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Wesley. Staying up as you do.
It's always such a pleasure. I mean, here's hoping that Kel gets his pen out and pens an autobiography sometime soon, right? And we can all get back together again for a third edition of the book club.
Well, he did write a children's book.
He wrote a children's book.
Perhaps after I read the book to my child.
I like that. Yeah, forget me. You should have a book club episode with your child. That makes sense.
With an infant.
Wesley, we're gonna with Adam. Can we get an audio recording? We won't, publish it or anything for copyright issues. But can we just get you reading the Kenan and Kel books? Can we just? We'll pay you.
Yeah, I don't think the publishers are going to come down on me for that one.
We'll pay you, Wesley. We will.
Oh yeah.
We'll send you a whole case of orange soda.
One more time, Wesley Mead. Where can our fans find you if they're curious for your TV and book expertise?
I mean, they'd have to be truly desperate if they listen to this. I need to hear more from that guy. He's got his head screwed on, right? But if you genuinely do, wesleymead.co.uk has links to all my social media. I'm at Wesley Mead on Twitter or X as it's now known. Or you can just Google my name and you'll find some stuff about me. And there's also this lawyer in America. So anything relating to books, TV, or movies is me. Law is that guy.
Yeah, I just learned recently there's another Adam Lemma in the Philadelphia area too. which is blasphemy.
There's an Aaron Lemma realtor in New York, and I've just been thinking about reaching out for the longest time. You're just like, hey, it's me. Did you ever see me before? On a quick, speedy Google search.
All right, Aaron, why don't you bring us home?
Until next time, everybody. Here it goes.
Thank you for listening. You can send us an email at KenanCalPodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at anchor.fm/KenanCalPodcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all at KenanCalPodcast.